So, next up, hardware innovation versus AI's energy appetite. Can efficiency balance rising energy demands? Let's find out from the experts. Up next, we have Cindi Bough, Managing Director at Climate Investments. Next, we have Andrew Wee, Director of Hardware Partnerships at Cloudflare. We have Ronnie Chung, Group Head of Responsible AI at Centrica. And Oscar Cantalejo, Head of Perseo at Iberdrola. And to moderate this discussion, I invite Claudine Emeott, Partner at Salesforces Ventures Impact Fund. Enjoy.
Yeah. It's going to be a party.
All right. Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? This room feels like a little bit low energy right now. I know it's mid-afternoon. I am very jet-lagged, and I have lost count of the number of espresso drinks that I've had today. But I am now feeling energized to be on this stage with this great group of people and to be talking about this topic. We're diving into the critical intersection of hardware innovation and the exploding needs, energy needs of AI. And we have a really great group of panelists here spanning investing, hardware, AI ethics, and energy production. And so we're looking forward to covering this topic, first of all, with group discussion. And then I really do want to turn it over to the audience and offer a chance for you all to ask questions of these experts on stage as well. So as you're listening to the conversation today, please think through some questions, hold them, and then we'll save time at the end. But first, let's just start with a quick round of intros so everybody knows more about who we all are. I'll begin. I am Claudine Emeott. I'm a partner at Salesforce Ventures. I've been there for 8 years. I'm based in San Francisco, and I lead our impact investing strategy, where I focus a lot of my time on climate and where climate meets enterprise software. You may be wondering why someone working at a giant software company investing in software is leading this discussion. But with our $1 billion generative AI fund, we have a lot of investments in companies that are very interested in this topic of hardware innovation and how it can address, as I said, what has become clearly an exploding demand for energy. So I'm personally excited to be learning from this group, and I will pass it on to Oscar. Yeah, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm Oscar Cantalejo. I'm leading the Perseo, that is a corporate VC of Iberdrola. Iberdrola is a European utility with activities worldwide. So from my group, what we are looking for basically are two main things. One, technologies or opportunities that can have some impact in our sector, specifically in some of our activities, to create a partnership and invest in those companies and accelerate any of those areas. And also we are launching and creating new businesses that are not core for Iberdrola at this point, but could be potentially in the future. So on that regard, very focused on anything that is related to electrification, demand electrification, of course, heating, but also we have some interest, of course, in data centers. That is supposed to be one of the demand growth for us in the future.
Ronnie?
Thank you there. Hi, I'm Ronnie Chung. I head up Responsible AI for Centrica, which is a utilities and energy company. I guess my main role, and then context for this, I think if you think for the last decade, ethics, universal ethical considerations, people have traditionally sort of thought about, and rightly so, fairness, trust, bias, explainability, data privacy, human autonomy, and so on. My role at Centrica is also not just covering those parts, but also ensuring we also think about robustness, resilience. We've seen in the past few years some critical infrastructure, payment systems issues, airports going down and the chaos that causes. And then as an energy company, it's the environment. It's the sustainability point, because what you've seen, I think Kieran from Ontario Pensions mentioned the attention is everything, or attention is all you need paper. I mean, since that paper then, from 2022 really onwards with generative AI, you've seen a significant change in resource usage, not energy as in terms of powering, but also resource for cooling and so on. And so we also factor that in, the sustainability point, from using AI to help with applications that help us to deliver a greener, fairer future, but also looking at how we use AI to then optimize things as well from an energy perspective and sustainability. And we'll come onto the conversation as part of this discussion, because if current trends continue, then world usage of AI, agentic AI, AGI, is not sustainable from an energy perspective. Yeah. All right.
Andrew, thank
Great.
you, Ronnie.
Thanks, Ronnie. So Andrew Wee, Director of Hardware Partnerships at Cloudflare. I have responsibility for all the CapEx that goes into our data centers. And AI keeps me up at night. It's the number one problem for me, looking at efficiencies and TCO and does it make sense? And so I'm here really excited to learn from this esteemed panel, as well as everyone in the audience today, what AI means to you from an energy perspective, and leave with some knowledge and some learnings. So glad to be here and excited for the discussion today.
Thanks. And Cindi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cindi Bough. I am Managing Director at Climate Investment. Climate Investment is a specialist decarbonization investment firm, and we have two investment strategies on the venture capital and the growth capital side. And we care very massively about greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So as we think about sort of rising energy demands and what the AI wave is coming forward, this is something that is a real area that we want to be looking at investments, both on the hardware and the software and the infrastructure side, and looking at all the innovations and the technologies out there. Very specifically, I think around this topic, we talk about the rising energy demands and how are we going to meet those energy demands from the rise of AI and regenerative AI that Ronnie was talking about. But it's not just sort of the training. Training models are taking 1,200 megawatt hours. And then you add on top of that inference. Inference could be 20 to 50x higher than training. And so then you think about this energy problem, and it could be massive. And so one of the things we debate at our investment committee is this sort of like the fourth industrial revolution? How is this going to impact things? And how are we going to do this sustainably? How are we going to power this? But not just energy, but like the water side of it and the labor side of it. How are we actually going to grow? AI is fantastic. I mean, ChatGPT and all these wonderful tools are actually really helpful. And it's getting better and better and better. The training models are getting better, and the inference is getting better. But it's going to then transform industries and then have a real impact on our ecosystem and our environment. So we're looking at investing in spaces, and we are not afraid of just not looking at just software, but we're not afraid of hardware. So I'm looking forward to speaking on this panel.
Thank you. Thank you all for setting the table for the conversation. I want to spend our first few minutes of discussion just to essentially size the challenge and understand the scale of it. And so starting with the big picture, Andrew, Cloudflare gets to see the internet's traffic on a minute-by-minute basis. And I'd love to understand from you how you're observing the growth in AI. You said it's keeping you up at night. But if you could help us get more specific on what that means from your vantage point, it'd be really helpful.
Perfect. Thanks, Claudine. Thank you very much. Perfect slide. I think this graphic helps set the table in a really, really important fashion. So maybe just a quick intro. So Cloudflare, we're a public company. We're about 35 billion market cap, 2 billion ARR. And we're the cloud connectivity company. So we have all these services that run it. Connectivity services, security services, builder services, developer services. But underneath all that resides my edge network. And every blue dot here is a colo, a data center, a POP that has my server gear, networking gear, and silicon. And so what gives me a lot of grief and a lot of pain and a lot of angst is how do I deploy hardware solutions that make sense for the business? Are we building a durable business, a scalable a margin positive business? And it's hard to answer that today. So that's one thing that I really stress about. So maybe also framing the problem statement a little bit more. So what do we see at Cloudflare? We see, number one, we see a lot of customers. So we have a lot of customers that use our services, specifically in AI. So we can count some of the most important AI companies as our customers. We can count 3 million developers on AI as our customers as well. So we're in a very unique position. We see both sides. We see bookended both sides of the equation. As a consequence, the traffic that comes through Cloudflare today is 20% of the internet traffic that runs globally. So you probably use the Cloudflare network unwittingly today. As you're surfing, as you're doing your banking, if you're on an iOS device or you're in ChatGPT, it runs through Cloudflare. So what do we see specifically that's driving traffic? I would say it 4 things. LLMs, we see a lot of LLM traffic. We see a lot of AI search traffic. We see a lot of AI automation traffic. Those are the obvious ones. A 4th one that's interesting is because of all this increase in traffic, we see a lot of cyber traffic, a lot of bot traffic in particular. Good bot traffic and bad bot traffic. So we have a lot of crawlers that go through the internet looking for information, and some of that's good. But there's a lot of nefarious bad actors on the internet right now. And as a security company, we see fraud, cyber attacks, and the like actually increase as a consequence. So that's 4 things that are increasing a lot of traffic. And maybe the 5th one is our developers that love our network, 3 million of them are using our network every day. All that collectively is increasing our traffic, and as a consequence, the power, the actual compute resources are blowing up. So maybe 3 data points that I stole from last year's World Economic Forum. Compute power is doubling every 100 days in AI. Number 2, the CAGR on compute growth is growing at 26 to 30% annually. And number 3, if this trend continues by 2028, AI compute power will be equivalent to the power consumed by the country of Iceland. So frightening numbers. And this audience probably is well aware of those challenges. So that's the problem that we were looking at today.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oscar, from your perspective, what are the projected increases that you're seeing in energy demand, and how that maps to
Well, what
AI?
we see, and especially here in Spain, and maybe we are somehow more optimistic in the sense that we are at the beginning. So here in Spain, we have about 300 megawatt capacity installed. Talking about data centers, it is less than 1% of our electricity demand here. And we have a lot of renewables, and we are deploying renewable massively. So we think at this point this as a good opportunity to increase the data center footprint here in our country. We think, and we have also set up a company for accelerating this implementation here with the aim of using somehow our expertise and our presence here for providing the energy to those data centers and looking for partners that want to be present here in our market. And we think, of course, this will increase the demand, but the electricity demand in Europe, and specifically here in Spain, is decreasing year over year, and electricity generation is being increased, those generation that comes from renewables. So I think we have an opportunity to use those resources for data centers and this new AI data center that consumes 3 times more than the current one. So I think it's at this point for us an opportunity. We need to do it and think about doing it in a sustainable way, and not, I mean, we are not thinking about having here 3 gigawatts of data centers in 2030, but I think we can progress from 300 megawatts to 1 gigawatt or something like that, something that is reasonable and sustainable for our system here.
Thank you, Oscar. And Ronnie, to round us out on this conversation topic, AI energy consumption isn't just a technical challenge that our other panelists have talked about grappling with, but it's also an ethical one. And so you think about the size of that. How do you think about the depth, essentially, of the ethical impacts in terms of energy and resource usage?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of the people in this room have probably experienced themselves where there is tremendous excitement around generative AI in particular right now. Think of an idea, think of a problem, think of a frustration, Gen AI. And so if you think about responsible design, then even right at the beginning, the purpose of what you're trying to solve, and therefore the model selection, has an environmental impact. Because if you look at traditional machine learning techniques, ensemble models, cubic models, random forest, they are kilowatt type usage, whilst generative AI, let's not go into detail about the training that you mentioned, there's significant training costs. Let's just think about inference, so the chain of thought that happens when you actually use generative AI. That is on another level. So you're talking at another scale of energy use. And so therefore, even right from the start, just selecting the right model for the right usage is important. And you're starting to see, even I noticed earlier in this room, there's lots of behavioral changes. If you were to come to this room maybe a few years ago for a similar talk, people may even have old-fashioned sort of micro cassette to record. And until recently, a lot of people probably use their phone to capture, record the notes. But I see in this room, people are using GPT models to listen and translate. And also, they've got agents running, asking questions, reasoning, doing chain of thought. All of this is using more and more power. So, it's a tough question in terms of, and I really like the way you responded earlier in terms of trying to scale and put a handle on this. I guess looking at the raw data that you had on your slide is very helpful. But yeah, I think it goes from right at the beginning, design, purpose, all the way through making sure, and this is a struggle right now, it's difficult to understand actually what's your carbon footprint, in effect, of your usage of an LLM. The vendors are opaque about this for various reasons. You could, until really beginning of this year, sort of tie that in with financial ops calculations to try and be environmental, and then DeepSeek happened, and so now you're thinking, oh, actually it's not so much about FinOps. So it's a challenge. So you need to therefore build in the appropriate steps throughout the AI lifecycle to think about from an environmental perspective as well. And I think it's important. I think a lot of people at this conference, because of the types of people you are, will have the environment at mind. I'm sort of newish to the energy industry. I know my youthful good looks may not belie 25 plus years. I've spent a lot of time in consultancy, financials, banking, and in those industries, they don't think about energy and don't think about sustainability when they're thinking about application development. And that's going to be a challenge because the compound effect of more and more application build, moving from machine learning, classical machine learning, to language models, to agentic AI, and then AGI, and that's where the leading sort of tech firms, OpenAI, Google, DeepMind, and so on, they think within 5 years, AGI. And then you've got quantum as well, don't forget. It's going to be, so it's about putting in good design practices, to answer your question, and thinking, being conscious about the sustainability side, the energy consumption side, the resource usage side, when you design, when you architect, and when you design your product.
Can I jump in and
Please,
ask a question to you, Ronnie, about that? Because obviously this is very close to my heart and close to a lot of our hearts. We're energy geeks to begin with, and we want to make sure there is kind of a carbon price associated with what we're doing on the AI and the data side. So on the standards or regulation side, there's not much there.
Correct.
Where do you see that? Do you see that actually happening?
So I think it's going to be difficult with recent geopolitics. I think with the recent change in US government, there's been a change in attitude towards regulation. I think that the simple message is deregulation equals good. I don't agree with that. I understand it needs to be more effective, more efficient, less red tape, less bureaucratic regulation, but I wouldn't say complete deregulation. And so I don't see that happening in the next 5 years because it's become a geopolitical arms race with AI, with AGI as well. with competition for capability. And, you know, if you think about wider things that are happening, like Ukraine, Russia, which effectively is an AI war, that's an AI drone war, I think national interests are developing to such a level above, you know, us as corporates, really. So no, I don't see them wanting to regulate this. So it's going to be a challenge. Yeah.
I think it's
Well, maybe bringing us to a more positive and hopeful
Sorry.
note. No, I mean I appreciate it, and I agree. I think it's a huge question,
Yeah.
and I think it's a big challenge as a piece of this puzzle. But you know, my hope is that Cindi, you might be able to offer some hopeful views on innovations in technology, particularly around energy efficient AI infrastructure and hardware. Would love to know what you're seeing as an investor in this space. And in addition to that, what are the bottlenecks in the market?
Well, we spoke about one of the bottlenecks, but we'll get off that kind of doomy topic. But, you know, so I think about sort of deal flow as like the tip of the spear. We're venture investors. We see what kind of like ideas are coming out there. And it's interesting from a deal flow perspective, I'm seeing tons of opportunities of companies who've now pivoted their business to deliver power for data centers, right? Because there's an inherent problem where you're seeing data centers take, on average, 2 years to build, maybe faster, as they get to the edge, et cetera. But typically, an energy plant that's going to support that renewable energy, hopefully, is going to take 4 years, right, with siting and permitting and you know, digging and trenching and interconnection, et cetera. So there is a challenge of time scale that is hard to power. So I see a lot of that, but that's not really a long-term innovation that you think about, like, I want to be investing in that as a venture investor and that'll return my fund, right? So in terms of the hardware side, there's a lot of energy efficient, you know, lower power chips that are much more efficient. We're seeing a lot of those, which are really exciting. Thermal and heat is a massive problem in data centers. So we're seeing not only that as a problem, but as an opportunity. So there's obviously cooling opportunities and cooling technologies that are really interesting that people are looking at, but also using thermal waste heat from data centers, which is actually quite good heat for repowering the data center, or thinking about, you know, thermal storage or other opportunities and other use cases to then reduce the energy footprint. And then, you know, we're seeing like a lot on photonics, which is quite interesting. And these are all very early innovations on the hardware side, which could really help the energy efficiency side. But it's sort of this like war against innovation, acceleration, and investment in the space,
and the need
versus the need for data, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this really interesting dynamic, and I actually don't see enough investment dollars going to hardware. People still love Cloudflare and all the infrastructure and all the power, right? And all the people see the premium and they say, okay, that's a quick buck. We can make a little bit of money right here, boom, boom, right? And get a huge PPA contract-wise for clean power, right, from some of the hyperscalers.
Yeah.
And so I still think there's more investment dollars, investors out there and innovators out there. Like if you have a great idea on energy efficiency, come talk to us. Investors, please invest in that space, because I don't think it's enough. There's a lot of people going after sort of the SaaS solution, the software optimization stuff, you know, the better design, et cetera, which is fantastic and has the more standard venture returns. But like energy investors, we invest for the harder returns.
Yeah, and a longer term horizon. And so,
Yeah.
and maybe that's a great segue to you, Andrew. What are you seeing today?
Yeah.
Cindy's seeing innovations that may not be market ready for another several years, but you're dealing with this challenge today. And so what kind of innovations are you looking at and maybe even currently deploying?
Yeah, so I'll react to one comment she made strongly because I feel differently, and then I'll provide some examples where I think there's actually positive traction. So I was at the NVIDIA GTC conference 3 weeks ago, and it's the in Jensen Huang's words, it's the AI nerd fest or Super Bowl of AI, whatever it is. But as you walk through the San Jose Convention Center, It's rack after rack of liquid cooling, immersion cooling, and it frightens me. It frightens me because what business supports this type of CapEx, this type of OpEx? Other than LLMs and hyperscalers, and the prior panel had a great discussion that the rest of us that are not hyperscalers, how do you have a OpEx model that supports liquid cooling? How do you have a CapEx model to deploy these pipes that I feel belong in a ship and not in a data center? It really, really keeps me up at night. So that piece, I think, needs a lot more work. And I personally am a lazy person, so I want to kick that can down the road many, many years before we actually have to use liquid cooling for hardware. Now, what I do see promise is on the silicon side. So I've been doing this for 30 years. I cut my teeth at Intel and Samsung and built systems for Apple and Facebook. So I kind of know systems and silicon. So traditionally, in compute and data center, that's x86. That's the protocol. The CPU structure is typically x86. That's Intel or AMD. They're great. But I think ARM, which is the new, well, it's not really new, at least in data center side, ARM CPUs are making inroads. And Cloudflare, 3 years ago, was the first company outside of another hyperscaler to deploy ARM CPUs in a data center. And ARM basically drops the power performance basically by 50%. And so it's a tried and true method. NVIDIA has now their Gray systems, also ARM-based systems. Other companies are doing that as well. I can mention Ampere. Ampere now has been acquired, so now they're also trying to do something with companies like Cloudflare. So I think ARM's really promising. But there's also a new kid on the block, the new arm of ARM, and it's called RISC-V. RISC-V basically is also sort of a low-power player, promises to be 10 times more power efficient than ARM. Many, many startups are looking at RISC-V. You know, there's some names out there, I wouldn't mention them. We're working with them and doing POCs and so forth. So I think on the silicon level, a lot of promise. I'll add one more at the system level. So in the traditional server space, all these power-hungry assets are stranded in a single server. So CPU, GPU, FPGA, storage, memory, all in a single server. So when you power everything up, everything gets used, and your power draw is terrible. So there's companies out there that do what we call composable systems. So you disaggregate all these systems, and then you connect them with high-speed links, PCIe, Ethernet, or other links, and only spin up those assets as your workload requires it. Basically reduces the number of servers, reduces your OpEx. I think it's a great solution. We're working with some startups. There's one in Denver, without mentioning their name, but they're in Denver. Very, very, very promising software composable solutions. We love what they're preaching. So I think those things are what we feel are useful.
You're clearly a super expert guru on chips. So can I ask a question on if you think about limitations of silicon?
Yeah.
Where is industry? Is it
Yeah.
how maxed? How close to max out the silicon are we?
I think the demise of silicon has been called many, many times, and the engineers are still finding ways to get to the atomic level, the subatomic level, and I think there's still no slowdown in sight. Intel, despite their trials and tribulations, they're still a leader. Samsung's the leader. TSMC is the leader. I think they will make silicon work as long as possible. I think photonics is very, very interesting. I was at Intel when Intel photonics was a thing.
Right.
20 years ago. I think there's still a lot of promise, and maybe photonics has a place maybe at the rack level. It definitely has a place from sort of DCI, data center connections. That's very, very important. But I think everything is complementary, but silicon itself is still the bread and butter, and there's no slowing down that piece of the business.
Can I ask a question for Andrew?
Please.
Sorry, we're taking your questions.
Sorry.
No, it's one thing that you really mentioned, which was interesting, is we're starting to work with this company who is giving us a lot of promise.
Yes.
So I'm curious, so if there's a startup out there or a startup of ours, how would they get the interest of Cloudflare? What is that cycle of commercialization with a company of your size? What are the sort of steps that you take through that, whether it's POC, reference, et cetera, and like, what is the typical lifetime that you think that, to get to a place where you can say, okay, I will buy your product?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to have you answer that too, actually, from an energy
so I'll be
sector
respectful of time, so
perspective.
I'll give the thumbnail. So typically, we have obviously a conversation, introductory conversation. We do some exploratory, technical, and business conversations. But ultimately, the proof of the pudding is a POC. We run your hardware in our colos, in our data centers. We run production traffic. We stress it, And 9 out of 10 times, they fail because we are very, very thorough on security, on performance and power, and even the most promising ones never get to the finish line. So it's very tough. And so, but that being said, I encourage you to try because you miss 100% of shots you don't make. And so give it a shot. And with that,
Yeah, Oscar, how do you think about that and the role that the energy sector can play in terms of incentivizing earlier stage tech?
Related to that topic, this recall me somehow the other areas that had happened before, thinking about the parallel situation with renewables. At the beginning, everyone was thinking, okay, renewables, this is fine, we are using this energy that is clean and green and so on. And some years later, we all are thinking about how this could be improved in terms of circularity, improve in terms of sustainability, and then you start to develop technologies that allow you to, I don't know, recycle plates, to recycle PV panels, batteries, etc., because you have been creating like an issue that you need to solve, and this is something for me seems similar. So we are now thinking about an exponential growth in AI or data centers. So we are thinking and testing, in your case, technologies that potentially could maybe not solve the whole issue, but at least reduce the impact. And this is something I think that will be increasing in the coming years. More and more companies, and I'm sure Cindi has also seen a lot of companies now starting to think about data centers, and maybe 5 years ago, no one was thinking about that. So people is now thinking how to solve these issues that these guys are going to have. In terms of energy, I think there is no difference between the solutions that we can provide to a data center or an big industrial customer. So we are trying to improve the efficiency on that, trying to see if we can be more sustainable on the energy production and distribution. But at the end of the day, we have all the customers, big industries, pulp and paper, chemical, etc., consuming a lot of energy, and we also want them to be cleaner and more sustainable. So for our end, it's like another piece in the puzzle, trying to offer as cleaner energy as possible and in a more sustainable way, but no any different with other sector.
Thank you. Ronnie, any hope that AI can be actually part of the solution here and not just the problem?
Yeah, definitely. So AI must be part of the solution, and you've got a lot of brains at this event who are working on optimization capabilities that will be part of it. Yeah, I mean, it's not just hardware, it'll be software as well, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cindi, one last question for you, and then I'm going to move into a lightning round of final remarks before we open it up to Q&A. We already touched a little bit on the need for regulation. Would love your view on policy standards that could help with this challenge that we're facing. What do you see as an investor that would be an accelerant?
Couple things, and we've touched on a couple of these topics. So obviously standards would be nice, but maybe we start with transparency, right? Like give the information, so then you can have carbon intensity per compute. So you really understand what you're designing, how you're designing, and what the carbon intensity is associated with that. That would be nice if we could give people scores and think about that, even if it's maybe not specifically standardized and regulated yet, given changes. That would be really good. The other thing is around procurement, right? So thinking about like how can we get innovations out quicker into the hands of players like yourself or hyperscalers, et cetera. Like startups say, oh, we have something available, and the hyperscalers don't adopt it. But I think that's why I asked the question, is the bridge isn't clear, right? And so I think very often startups think they have the best thing since sliced bread, and they don't, right? Because they don't pass the test. But I think that iterative process is really helpful to be able to think what are the needs and what are the sort of criteria that is required from a cyber performance and, from a PUE maybe potentially if that's criteria, and to deliver that solution and to be very clear about that and say, these are my hours that I've done myself, so then will you then help it? But I do think it would be nice if there was a little bit more like transparency on the procurement of that.
Yeah,
Ronnie.
it's a very difficult topic. I think the main language model vendors, there's a conflict. They don't really want to give you this transparency.
I know.
Okay, it's not in their commercial interest as users and deployers of language models to have this information. So that's I think, maybe unfair, but I think there's part of it. Then you've got to think about sort of language models, generative AI, from a data and AI lifecycle. It's different to traditional machine learning in that you've got a lot more variables here. You've got input, you've got inference, and you've got output, and they're all dynamic. So it's not like traditional machine learning where you could be quite tight with your predictives for what you think your outputs are going to generate. So I think post-live observability for a range of things, and a lot of companies at the moment do it for security reasons, rightly. You know, look for toxic or fraudulent type activities, observe for that in the post-live environment, but also then post-live monitoring from a sustainability and environmental carbon perspective is also something that would need to be developed out, but people will need to think about doing that themselves, because I don't think the vendors will do it for you.
Yeah.
I think the other one that might be interesting, and it'd be interesting to hear your views, Oscar, is about siting for renewables, like co-located, associated with data centers.
Yeah.
And today there's not really real incentives to do that, right? Real incentives for, hyperscalers and data centers to be thinking about that. Wouldn't it be nice if there was policy or support associated with thinking about having clean power powering these data centers? So I don't know if you're seeing that in any of the European countries.
No, but I think this is happening, and all of the data centers and also some kind of standardization is to use clean energy. So we sometimes, or now most of the times, it's co-located or very close to the data center to avoid networks and so on. And in the past, it used to be more a PPA scheme. So, but always asking for clean energy. So this is a trend that has happened. I think it's relevant for hyperscaler or data center operators to have this stamp somehow. So it's something that happened. We are, I think, serving more than 7 terawatt-hour per year to hyperscalers data center, and I think most of them are clearly on that path.
We have just a couple minutes for a question or two. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to jump in while we have these incredible experts on stage, captive? Don't be shy. We have someone who can run a mic.
It's a shy audience, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I see a hand.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sophie Brusgaard-Jewett. I'm the CEO of a software company out of Norway. We've been operating for 3 years, and our application of AI has obviously changed a lot in that time, and maybe especially the last year. When I've asked, we're preparing to start fundraising soon. When I've asked investors how they will consider kind of the application of AI during due diligence processes, the answers have been very vague. So I think this would be maybe the perfect panel to ask. How would you recommend, I guess, investors to evaluate AI and software? And just to, sorry, I didn't even mention that. We do decarbonization strategies for companies. So we take a lot of their existing financial data, and then we provide suggestions for how to decarbonize and put that into a forecasting and scenario modeling, et cetera. So yeah, that's my question.
Cindi, sounds like a question for you.
Well, I would say, investors like traction, and they like to see pilots, and they like to see POs, and they like to see backlog and pipeline, right? So if you have a software solution, like who's used it, how often have they used it, have they upsold it, have they bought more of it, have they used it for one and then have a repeat customer? These are sort of metrics that people look at, because what you're providing sounds like a nice to have, versus a must-have today. And we'd love to change that, but I think that that's not where we are today in our regulations and our policy. So I think, understanding where you are in your cycle and making sure that you have enough customer pull for what you're doing is I think the first thing I would look at.
Yeah, I think the reason you don't get the clarity is because a lot of investors don't actually know on what they actually need to audit. So you should take advantage of that. You should pivot that to your advantage, because as long as you can come up with scientific sounding rationale for then that will put you in if you can do some pre-thinking and say, offer that as how you test it, that probably you can take that to your advantage, because the reality is it's a nascent area, to be fair. It's a nascent area, so a lot of people don't know how to do this yet.
The other thing maybe I would add, which I think is a good point, Ronnie, is education.
Yep.
So a lot of people say, I have the best thing since sliced bread. Great. But how's that compare to what's out there in the market today? How's that compare against other innovations? What's the competitive landscape look like? Educate, educate, educate. Why is this market important? How is it growing? How big is it going to grow? What's its CAGR? Get some quotes from Andrew, basically, right? And teach people, because investors don't know, this is a very new and upcoming space. And our LPs are always asking, well, how do you guys think about this space? How do you think about digital infrastructure? What do you think about data center? How do you think about powering it? So there's a lot of education that can be helpful as a startup teaching your investors. Maybe you don't say it that way, but that is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you all. We are at time. This is a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.